What up racer, ItsJerone here and welcome back to another video. This is the final video of the year and I thought it would be a fun idea to sort of do a power ranking of the real life F1 drivers of the 2021 season. Now, this is my face, this is the first time I've did a facecam video, so if you didn't follow me on Discord or Twitter, you probably didn't know my face yet, so hello everyone. First of all, let me explain something about these rankings. It's not just like you would get your grade in school or something. Basically, a 1 expresses a very poor performance, a 5.5 is the average, and if some drivers get a 10, which as you can see by this tier list they don't, then they would have done a completely excellent performance where nothing could have been better at all. So I've plonked all 20 drivers into a tier list here. And before I get started, I first of all want to express that I try to bring this video as objectively as possible. Of course, these are still my opinions and how I experienced this season. And if you do have any comments or you think I've done some very weird assumption, then please let me know. But this is just my opinion and I try to bring it as objectively as possible. Now, for driver number 20, I don't think this will come as a surprise to any of you. It's Nikita Mazupin. Now, I don't think he did exceptionally bad or something. It really wasn't that bad in my opinion. He even has the overtake of the season. Now, this is just in a 1v1 racing situation. The real overtake of the season probably, in my opinion, was Max Verstappen's move around the outside of both Mercedes at Mexico. Or perhaps the dive bomb at the second restart at Jeddah, but that was just send and pray basically. But for Nikita Mazupin, he of course had a very rough start, spun out in turn 3 in Bahrain already in his first race, and I think his first third of the season was filled with a lot of spins. But after that I think he actually recovered quite well. Also as the season progressed he got closer to his teammates both in terms of race pace and quali pace. Moving on to driver number 19, and honestly I think this may surprise some of you, and I also find this very difficult to judge, but I've gone here for Mick Schumacher. Now, the Haas car is just impossible to judge, right, to other drivers, as you can't tell whether Mick drove like the car absolutely to the limit or whether he was off the limit all the time. You just really don't know here. In terms of the 1v1 comparison against his teammate, he obviously did a lot better, but I did feel he did lose the edge over his teammate a bit towards the end of the season. Furthermore, looking at the season as a whole, I think Mick Schumacher actually had more crashes than Nikita Mazupin. A couple of positives for Mick Schumacher. In Hungary he held off Verstappen and Ricardo for quite a while, and he's made it into Q2 twice in Turkey, and in France, well, in France he of course sort of caused his own Q2 by crashing out. So I think it's just too hard to judge, right? I've not been overly impressed with him. He didn't do too bad, but I honestly have no idea where to properly rank him. Next in the list, and I do think it's best to discuss both teammates at once here, and they are Antonio Giovinazzi and Kimi Räikkönen. Now, I really do feel like Alfa Romeo had the possibility to get Williams in the Constructors' Championship. I feel like they've left out on plenty of opportunities to score points, and I know they finished P11 and P12 many times, but I do think they could have gotten into the points more often. Now, in terms of this ranking, I've put Giovinazzi below Kimi, and as you can see in the 1v1 comparison, Gio did a little bit better, but Kimi just backed the points basically. Now, Gio in terms of qualifying potential was quite good, I would say, in Zandvoort, in Monza, but during those races he just was a bit crash prone, and I don't know, he never really delivered on his qualifying potential, so that's why I've put Kimi a little bit higher. Oh, by the way, I quickly forgot to mention this, also in some races where Alfa Romeo had the opportunity to score points, such as in Mexico, Gio actually was in front of Kimi, who was battling with Vettel the whole race, and basically due to strategy the team screwed Gio up, so it was not always his fault, but he did lose a couple of front wings at unnecessary times. Also, Kimi had a couple of weird crashes. Next up in the list, place 17, and I've moved my camera for a little bit so you can see a little bit better. And it's the AlphaTauri driver Yukitsunoda. Now, as much as I love Yuki, he underperformed this season, right? He had a very promising start in Bahrain at the start of the season. Looked like he really felt comfortable with the car. But then in Imola, he had a crash. And basically for a very long time throughout the season, he was just underperforming, having Q2 and Q1 exits a lot of the time, whereas Gasly was up in P4, P5, P6 quite often. And basically until the last 5 races or something, I would say, he just, I don't know, felt a little bit uncomfortable, not at ease, and basically the last 5 races of the season, he picked it up a little bit again. Moving on then to the last driver that received a 4 in this ranking system, and it's a race winner from the Italian GP, it's Daniel Ricciardo. Now, his move to McLaren was filled with a lot of hype, a lot of potential, how will he fare against Lando Norris, and realistically, even though he won a race, I feel like he underperformed for a lot of the races, right? A lot of the races he was outside of the top 10, whereas Lando was balling, getting podiums, getting top 5 finishes quite consistently, especially in the first half of the season. And yeah, in my opinion, there were like only 4 or 5 races where Ricciardo really delivered on his potential. In the end, I do think that Daniel Ricciardo cost McLaren the 3rd place in the championship. Moving on then to the last driver that, in my opinion, performed below average, and it is Aston Martin driver Lance Stroll. Now, last couple of seasons he always had that 1 or 2 stellar performances, like last year in Turkey, or I think 3 years ago now, where he got his podium in Baku, and yeah, this season he just didn't really perform anything spectacular. His best finish was P6 or P7 in Qatar, and although I do think he had potential in Baku again to surprise again, he was looking really strong on his hard set of compound tire. But then, of course, Pirelli decided it was time for his tire to blow up. So overall, he just had a very average season, in my opinion, and performed a little bit below average. Moving on then to the point where exactly at the average 5.5, in my opinion, receives Nicholas Latifi. He scored points twice, and of course his Hungary race was a very special one, driving in the top 3 for a very long time, but of course that was not a realistic finishing position for the Williams. But overall, I think he did really well in the first half of the season. He was definitely, in terms of qualifying pace, far below George Russell, but in the second half of the season I feel like he did step up quite significantly. Then heading on to the final driver who receives a 5, and I think this might surprise some of you, and it is Sergio Perez. Now, of course, he had to adapt to the new Red Bull car, right? And basically his goal for the season was to be the better number 2 driver relative to Valtteri Bottas. And I think throughout the season as a whole, Valtteri Bottas was, first of all, more consistent. More consistent in terms of outscoring Sergio Perez. And furthermore, I think throughout the season as a whole, Valtteri Bottas has been more of help towards Hamilton than Perez has towards Max Verstappen. Although, of course, in the last race of the season, Perez did something spectacular. Overall, though, I do think Sergio Perez was the reason Red Bull lost the constructors' battle against Mercedes. In my opinion, the performance of the car basically was 50-50 throughout the season as a whole. Or maybe even the Red Bull was a little bit better. Moving on then to 2 drivers that receive a solid 6, and in my opinion the first one is Sebastien Vettel. Of course, he moved teams, and throughout quite a significant amount of races he was struggling significantly in his Aston Martin, but relative to Stroll, I think Vettel did have his special performances, right? He had 3 races where he did exceptionally well. Those are, of course, the podium he got in Baku, and the race in Monaco, where he did an undercut on Hamilton and Gasly and finished P5 in the end. And also his race in Hungary, where unfortunately his P2 got stripped away due to some technical regulations where there was too little fuel in his car, but that's of course not his fault. So, although Stroll finished ahead of him in more races, I do think Vettel had that couple of special performances, which in my opinion warrants him a solid 6. Then The other driver that receives a 6, and I don't think this is much of a surprise, it's Valtteri Bottas, and I just explained most of the reasoning. In the races where both Perez and Bottas finished, Bottas usually finished ahead of Perez. And of course, Valtteri Bottas is just the type of driver, if something goes wrong, then just everything goes wrong, right? We've seen quite a couple of races where if he was somewhere outside of the points, he would just be stuck behind other cars forever. And also, a little bit of his luck, right? In Monaco, he was looking for a very good race, and then he had this 3 days time pit stop. So overall, I think he did the number 2 driver role in a perfect way, and in the end, Mercedes got the Constructors' title this year. Then it's time to move on to 2 drivers that, in my opinion, receive a solid 7, and the first of them is the Williams driver, George Russell. I do think he performed exceptionally well, especially in the first half of the season, or the first 2/3 of the season, really. Of course, a special moment for him qualifying that Williams in second place, and then of course the Spa race, where he got his first podium, and the first podiums for Williams again in a very, very long time. And that was just well deserved at that point. And overall, throughout the season, he had 4 points finishes, whereas Latifi only had 2. Towards the end of the season, I feel like he did lose a little bit of his glamour that he had in the first half of the season, where he made it into Q3 quite often, and this might also be due to the fact that he didn't receive all the upgrades from Williams, whereas Latifi did, but that's just a bit of speculation. I honestly don't know. But Russell put in a very solid performance this year, although he also had a couple of crashes, like, the one you're seeing on screen now with Valtteri Bottas, but overall, I think he earned this move to Mercedes, and let's see what happens next season. Moving on to the other driver that receives a 7, and it's a new race winner this year, it's Esteban Ocon. Basically, both him and Fernando Alonso have put in a very solid shift for Alpine this season, and hence consolidating P6 in the Constructors' Championship ahead of AlphaTauri. Now, of course, the one spectacular thing that stands out was Ocon's performance in Hungary, where he got the win. And overall, I think throughout the season, he had many top 8 finishes, didn't do anything rash. And yeah, that's just a very solid drive by him. Let's see what happens next year. Alright, we're moving into territory now, where we get to the drivers that have put in very good performances this season. And the first one is the rookie driver of the year. It is Fernando Alonso. Now, of course, we had high expectations from him making his return to Formula 1. And, it could have gone either way. Like, many people thought it would have been a toxic relationship between Alonso and Ocon, and between Alonso and Alpine. But it really was the opposite. Alonso was very helpful to the team. El Plan 2022. And yeah, realistically, we'll just see what happens next season. Now, in the 1v1 comparison against Ocon, you can see they're stacking up very similarly, but Fernando Alonso scored a couple of more points despite not winning a race. So that means throughout basically all other 21 races where, excluding the one where Ocon won, Fernando Alonso got himself up in relatively higher positions than Esteban Ocon. And I think he's shown very good racecraft this season, and I was very happy with Fernando. The only thing I didn't like was his sort of rage move on Mick Schumacher in Turkey, but besides that, I definitely loved Alonso's podium in Qatar as well, very well deserved, and I really hope to see Alpine up next year fighting for a Constructors' Championship. Now, the next 4 drivers, honestly, I would just give them an 8.2 or an 8.3 to all of them, and it was just very difficult to rank these 4 relative to each other. But for, I think, 6th place here, I've gone for AlphaTauri driver Pierre Gasly. His qualifying performances throughout the year have been spectacular, right? He's qualified up in P4, P5 so many times, and also quite often throughout the races he did manage to get into such positions, but there were also a significant share of races where he dropped off a bit again, and sometimes it was due to his own fault, like Pierre Gasly had a bit of a weird relationship with losing front wings this year, and secondly, sometimes he got screwed up by his team, just doing a weird strategy, such as in Qatar. But overall, I was very impressed with Pierre Gasly this year. Next up, I think it's time for both Ferrari drivers, and I've put Carlos Sainz just below Charles Leclerc for this season. And of course, Carlos Sainz moving teams from McLaren to Ferrari, and I think Carlos Sainz was the driver that adapted the quickest to the new car out of any of the drivers that moved teams. Also, throughout the year, he only got P8 or higher in the races where he did get into the points, so very impressive by him, and I'm also very impressed by the fact that he got P5 in the Drivers' Championship in the end, and he definitely was a key component in Ferrari getting third in the Constructors' Championship this year. He definitely has different traits relative to Charles Leclerc, but yeah, I was just very happy to see Carlos doing well. Then moving on to Charles, right, his first half of the season was just spectacular, and throughout the season as a whole, he managed to finish in 4th place 6 times, right? Whereas Carlos got 4 podiums, Charles only got 1 podium, I believe. And I think this is simply due to a little bit of luck that didn't come Leclerc's way, whereas it did get into Sainz's way, right? And overall, I think Leclerc just performed a little bit better than Carlos Sainz, but really, it wasn't by much. And yeah, just very impressed with both Ferrari drivers, to be honest. And I think Leclerc and next driver in this list, Lando Norris, had very similar performances, right? They both done exceptionally well in the first half of the season. Lando bagging a couple of podiums, getting top 5 finishes consistently, but then dropping off towards the second half of the season. And I think the turning point for Lando's season was the race in Russia, where he was looking for his first win, but then of course the late rain in that race meant that he sort of went for the wrong strategy and in the end dropped many places. I do feel like Lando could have performed a little bit better in or after Russia, although some parts of his race were also influenced by luck. But if you, for instance, look at his Brazil race, right, he had a better start than Carlos Sainz. Sainz squeezed him a little bit to the right, but then Lando just turned more to the left than Sainz was already turning to the left to give Lando space again. So that was just a very weird crash, and sometimes also strategy didn't go his way. He had quite a lot of punctures towards the end of the season. But overall, Lando definitely had a season he could be proud of. Coming towards the last 2 drivers in this list, and I don't think it will be a surprise for any of you who are here at the last 2 places, or the first 2 places, depends how you see it. In second, I've put Sir Lewis Hamilton, and honestly, I was debating to put him in the category 8. Throughout the season as a whole, he's made a couple of mistakes, which I usually didn't see from him, like for instance in Imola, where he got very lucky with the red flag in the end. And yeah, over the season as a whole, of course, he was a great competition to Max, but I feel like there were also a couple of races where he wasn't really on it, right? His racecraft was a little bit down relative to other seasons, I would say, and at times he didn't really seem as motivated to win the title as ever. So that's why I've put him in second. And of course, who else could be number 1 this year? It's our new world champion. It's Max Verstappen, of course. He had the best season of his life, of course, and in my opinion, he didn't do everything perfectly right. Like, there were definitely a couple of occasions where he had some slip-ups as well, and I think he probably could have secured his title a little bit earlier, considering Red Bull, until Brazil, definitely had the better car of the season. As I said, throughout the season as a whole, I think it was basically 50-50, or maybe just a little advantage to Red Bull, but not by much. Now, it will be very interesting to see which cars and which teams will be up there next season to compete for the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championship. Before finishing off the video, I have 2 things to compare my own rankings to, and those are the fan power rankings and the Drivers' Top 10 as voted by the F1 drivers themselves. Now, let's first go over the fan power rankings, and something that catches my eye is the fact that Carlos Sainz has been put in P3, which is in itself maybe not too bad, but I don't think he performed better than Lando Norris throughout the season. And Pierre Gasly in 4th, in my opinion, is really high. And in my opinion, it's completely criminal to put Charles Leclerc down in P9. Like, in the 1v1 comparison against Sainz, you could clearly see that Leclerc sort of performed better, but just received less points for it, right? Then also Sergio Perez in P6, as I put him in P12 or something, I think, or maybe P13 even. We definitely significantly differ there. Then comparing it to the drivers, I'd rather be consistent with the driver rankings than the fan power rankings as a whole, and I think I am relatively consistent with as voted by the drivers. I basically have the same top 9 essentially, except I switched Sainz and Leclerc, and Alonso and Gasly, and Russell and Esteban Ocon. And I can live with Mick Schumacher in P10 as well, but really, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I just really don't know where to properly rank him. If you did enjoy this video though, then make sure you leave a like, and I wish you all a very happy new year, and hopefully next year I'll definitely be making more videos of FRL Racing League and AOR as well. So stay tuned for that, and I really hope you have a lovely new year. See ya!